As a president of a country of over 60 million people, you need to know that you've got so many people backing up, so you shouldn't be bullied by a president from another country.
I think what Ramaphosa should do with Trump is firstly make peace, and secondly, when the South African government has attacked Israel in the ICJ, I think it's a huge mistake. The government will be punished for attacking Israel.
This high-stakes meeting is in sharp focus. It's topical, and it starts right now. A very good evening to you, South African, those watching around the world. My name is Blaine Herman, and this is It's Topical. Our digital audience joining us tonight. Looking forward to them weighing in terms of some of their burning questions for our guest in a short while. It's a crucial meeting on the cards this week. President Cyril Ramaphosa is on a working visit to the United States of America. On Wednesday, he will meet with President Donald Trump at the White House to discuss bilateral, regional, and global issues of interest. Objectives? What's key? Well, according to the presidency, the visit to the United States provides a platform to reset, underline that word, reset the strategic relationship between the two countries. And you get a sense, right, that there's a need to find ways to iron out misunderstandings, one, and distortions, two. The urgency to hit the reset button evident. The umbrella question then becomes, what will it take to repair this relationship for both countries? Is it time to rethink the starting assumptions and find more effective ways to focus on areas of genuine common interest? We will discuss with the better minds on the program tonight. It leads us to the question of the week, and we're asking you, what key priorities should President Ramaphosa focus on in his meeting with President Trump to best protect South Africa's interests? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Let us know at SABC News_TV. On the Hoove, let's head to the Magic Wall, get you some context, as always. This geopolitical tension, what sort of risks does it pose for us here in South Africa? What's at stake? Let us know your thoughts at SABC News_TV. Perspective coming up. All right, let's tee up the discussion for you, what we know and why it matters. SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena joins me to discuss live. Sophie, thank you very much indeed for your time. Big meeting, crucial, maybe an understatement. What's at stake?
Well, at stake, it's the issue of both countries pushing forward the interest of their respective countries. But also, I think for South Africa in particular, how do you reset the relationship between the United States of America and South Africa, particularly focusing on trade and investment?
That's the big one, because I guess on top of mind to the president of South Africa would be the economy, getting jobs, 32.9% high unemployment. How does he navigate that without offending President Donald Trump? Now, two meetings that come into mind of late, that of the president of Ukraine and that of the Prime Minister of Canada. I want you to hear how this meeting went, first of all. Control, just roll the clip.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't. You're playing cards.
Mr. President.
You're playing cards.
Serious.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
Berated, another understatement, right? And these hand gestures says it all. I will talk to you about optics in a short while. But the other big meeting, Sophie, I want to play this clip. And just to tee it up for you, the big talking point getting into this meeting was maybe perhaps Canada becoming the 51st state of the United States. This is how Mark Carney answered that question.
As you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
That's true.
We're sitting in one right now, Buckingham Palace that you visited as well.
That's true.
And having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever. But the opportunity is in the partnership and what we can build together.
So, Mark Carney's meeting, as compared to President Zelensky's meeting, described somewhere in the middle. Not openly hostile, but not chummy either. What sort of lessons can South Africa learn from these two?
I think the president has been watching these videos, the advisors, and I think they even brought the people with experience in terms of body language to prepare for this meeting. It's not just Ramaphosa getting into Inkwazi and going to Washington. A lot of work has been done. I know for the fact that the man to watch is Marco Rubio. He is going to be there for irritation. He has to watch Vance's body language. And of course, then you focus on President Donald Trump. Now, when you look at Zelensky, President Zelensky, because he's not a shrewd politician, he didn't manage the body language in terms of response. When you look at the Prime Minister of Canada, he's a shrewd politician and economist. He has been there. He knew what kind of words and language to use, even evoking the UK monarchy.
Right.
And he knows very well Trump is so obsessed with what's happening in relation to the monarch in the United Kingdom.
Right.
And therefore he brought in that as part of diplomatic message to him that when you want to take Canada, remember, it's not only you who have a say. There are many people who like this country. And therefore, I think that's exactly what President Ramaphosa is going to do and must do. He must avoid to be confrontational, because in a debate, when you are confrontational, you lose the debate.
Right. Optics in politics becoming a very important factor to consider, and maybe politicians in the past didn't pay attention, but now in front of cameras, your movement, your gestures, how you portray yourself becomes so important. What's the do's and don'ts here, Sophie, especially taking into consideration the makeup of the press pool currently in the White House?
The president must be aware you are not going to have South African press corps only there. You are going to arrive to a hostile right-wing press corps in the Oval Office. Of course, there will be those who are very independent and rational. But the person who is going to decide who's speaking in terms of journalists, it's President Trump who's going to call the names. And therefore, he might strategically call the names of journalists from the United States of America, like people from your Fox News, who are going to be very hostile. And therefore, the president is not supposed to lose it. I always say, no matter how difficult, how hard, how robust a question can be, don't take it personal as a newsmaker. Just try to be strong and respond. You can be angry thereafter. So I think these are some of the issues that the president will have to take into consideration, that no matter how personal the questions can be, he must stay calm and just answer the question.
What does that mean? So, I mean, you've covered many press conferences involving world leaders, and you've got to experience that firsthand. Staying calm, not getting emotional. What does it mean when some of the questions are so provocative?
You just have to do that. You stay calm, you answer the question. Because you are a newsmaker. You have to answer the question. Sometimes I'm asking a very robust question because this is what people are saying. And therefore, as a journalist, I have to ask that question. It's not personal. The problem with politicians, they think when we ask questions, we are personal. We are asking questions on behalf of the people.
Right.
Sometimes you find that you don't hold the same view, but you have to ask that kind of a question, particularly as it relates to holding leaders accountable.
Right.
And therefore, the best form of defense when you are a newsmaker, when you are facing tough questions, I don't want to say hostile questions, is to stay calm and listen properly and respond.
Now, nobody expects the relationship between Cyril Ramaphosa and Donald Trump to be that of the Saudi Crown Prince.
We don't have the money and the resources. We don't have the jets.
But, well, you know, the story with regards to the Qatari offering
we don't have
big
the oil.
747. So what do we bring? What do we leverage?
Well, we do. I'm just saying it because, of course, you can't compare countries such as the countries in the Gulf region. South Africa has got cuts that they can use. What is the issues here or those issues that we can leverage on?
Right.
Any country in the world that wants to develop its technological skills, you need the rare minerals. Majority of those rare minerals are found in this continent. And everybody wants those rare minerals. That's our big, big plus. Secondly, we are a go-to to Africa. We are a go-to to Africa. We are a strategic country on the continent. You can't wish South Africa away. And therefore, you have to take that into consideration when you engage with South Africa.
So we're not going with the begging bowl, basically?
We are not going with the begging bowl. As we speak now, South Africa has accepted that AGOA it's unlikely not going to be renewed as it relates to us. But we are saying, let's have a mutual beneficial trade, and it must be done in a respectful manner. And that's all what South Africa can negotiate right now. Because I can't see President Trump changing his mind on the Afrikaners. Don't even go there. When he wants a response and answers, the president has already engaged him on that. Answer in a very short manner. Don't lecture him. When you lecture him, he is going to feel very offended. Go there with a discussion on the table. This is what I'm offering. This is where I can move. And what are you offering, Donald Trump?
Right. Thank you very much indeed, Sophie. It's a lot to watch. Do we know for sure, though, that there will be this press conference? Is that confirmed or is still...
Normally, it's not a press conference. You get invited inside to do the cutaways or photo op, and then he decides to take questions. But also to note... this thing is very complex in a sense that you can think that he's going to receive a hostile reception and then things turn differently or it wouldn't be the same with Ukraine because they were able to give Mcebisi Jonasi a visa to travel to the US as the envoy.
That's a good point.
And therefore that's a big, big, big story. For Mcebisi to have gotten that visa, in other words, yes, there are concerns here and there, but sometimes we overreact.
Possibly the pre-talks by the envoys, whoever the stakeholders are, might be crucial in terms of how we see that first meeting going. Sophie Magwena is the better mind on this subject, SABC News International editor there. Context, always important right here on It's Topical. Quick break, more next. Thanks so much. Welcome back. You're watching It's Topical. I just want to remind you about the question of the week, and we're asking you, what key priorities should President Cyril Ramaphosa focus on in his meeting with President Donald Trump to best protect South Africa's interests? Let us know at SABC News_TV. We've lined up a number of guests to give you fresh perspective on what is at stake with regards to this meeting. Joining me in studio is Khulekani Mathe, Business Unity South Africa CEO. Thank you so much for joining me, Khulekani. Also, virtually, J. Brooks Spector, former U.S. diplomat, as well as the associate editor at the Daily Maverick. Brooks, good to have you on the program. And Dr. Thapelo Tselapedi is an academic at Rhodes University. Good to have your better minds on the program. Our digital audience as well, please raise your virtual hand. Do my very best, as always, to get you into the conversation. Let's queue up your questions for our guests. Khulekani, maybe I can start with you. I mentioned this to Sophie as well earlier on. On top of mind for President Cyril Ramaphosa would be growing the South African economy, getting those jobs numbers up in terms of employment, currently sitting at 32.9% high. So that's top of mind. But how do you do that without offending or without making a mess up in terms of any misunderstanding with an economic superpower, but still getting your way in terms of improving your economy through trade?
Well, good evening, Blaine, and to the viewers and the fellow panelists. I mean, I think President Ramaphosa is very experienced. He's an experienced politician. I think the main thing, though, is to recognize the fact that first and foremost, there's a need to mend this relationship. Yeah. I mean, it's for all intents and purposes broken. And so I think he would know that you need to mend this relationship such that you don't get things to deteriorate, and you can start looking at measures necessary to, build on that in terms of jobs and all of that. So I think that would be important to keep in mind, and I have no doubt the president is well aware of as he goes to the White House.
Right. Brooks, various factors at play here for President Cyril Ramaphosa to navigate. If pushed against the wall with the claims of genocide, allegations of genocide in South Africa, and the need to defend South Africa's ICJ case against Israel, how can that be handled diplomatically?
Well, good evening. Good to be with you. I mean, one of the things that I observe is that Cyril Ramaphosa is really an experienced negotiator going back to the 1980s in very contentious times with the Chamber of Mines. It wasn't exactly a friend-on-friend relationship, but he learned and became very skillful at it. He doesn't lose his composure except in very rare circumstances. And I think that what he is going to do in response to what we just heard is he's going to be bringing a series of proposals, some of them more fleshed out than others, obviously, about the way in which any trade barriers and any necessary efforts to encourage trade and investment will be advanced. Let's put aside the idea of South Africa's continued beneficiary status under AGOA. AGOA is as an act of American law is due to expire this year, and I don't really sense that there's a whole lot of appetite in the American Congress to pass a revised or an extended version of it. So South Africa's task, the president's task, is to deliver a message of these are the things we would like to do, and these are the things we hope we can do together. One other point, to just add this slightly, good friend of mine who is well experienced in the world of international journalism said that Cyril Ramaphosa has to present a sandwich. The outside has to be a delicious, tasty piece of bread. Inside is the chewier bits, and then he has to close it off with yet another delicious, soft, sweet-tasting piece of bread. In other words, package the sticky parts in a way which makes it seem like, overall, we have a way to go forward, and here are the things that comprise it.
Right.
And the one last point, if I might, poor Mr. Zelensky was seriously handicapped because although he speaks English, it's certainly not his native language, and he was a bit flummoxed by the all-in that he was getting from 3 or 4 people at the same time. Cyril Ramaphosa, of course, is perfectly fluent in English, both in terms of content and the symbolic nature of the way he delivers his English. It goes back to what Sophie was talking about right at the beginning of your broadcast.
So much would have been learned from those meetings with the Canadian Prime Minister as well as the Ukrainian President. And with regards to your sandwich analogy, probably some will argue it needs to be toasted as well, given the state of play. But pull back the curtains for us, Brooks, and help us understand in the preparation of this sandwich, what goes on prior to these meetings? Is there lots of talks going on behind the scenes so the president from both sides will get a good sense of the reception they're about to receive?
Well, the normal standard thing is to have what sometimes is called a murder board, where you have you set up a situation where you literally practice the process. You have people who are designated the people to ask uncomfortable, unpleasant, awkward questions, and then the person who's going to be the speaker, in this case the president, has to figure out how to modulate the answer. Yeah. One of the tricks of the trade, of course, is to say, "I'm so glad you raised that point or asked that question." If it's a media person, "I'm so pleased that you brought that up. It allows me to say da 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 da," or, "Gosh, your question really has a whole series of parts to it. Let me break that down for you into its constituent parts." It does two things. It gives you a moment to think about what you're going to say, but it also says, this is not simple performance art. This is serious stuff among adults, and we have to treat it that way. And that's typical of how these things are prepared. The Americans, I don't know whether Donald Trump does the murder board, the practice run, because he thinks of himself already as a master of the use of the media. But I suspect that within the union buildings, Cyril Ramaphosa has done a couple of run-throughs of this because he realizes that the stakes in this meeting are pretty high.
Right. Dr. Tselapedi, talking about the stakes, would you classify this meeting as a make or break meeting? Dr. Thapelo, can you hear us?
Am I audible?
You are now. Go ahead.
Thank you for that. Look, I don't think it's going to be the end if things don't go well. I think there's going to be continuous engagements between the Americans and the South Africans, whether maybe not at the presidential level, but you will certainly find that at the ministerial level and going down with the DGs. So you have to also look at that the United States and South Africa have had a long relationship.
Yes.
From the time during the anti-apartheid movement, of course, with the Democrats and the ANC prior to 1994. So I don't think that's going to end. Of course, also given that, that President Trump has 4 years in the United States, we'll have to see whether his tenure will be extended, I doubt. And I think there will be a lot of space for South Africans to continuously engage there.
Right.
I think there's already quite a lot of U.S. presence in terms of business. There is a lot of engagement in terms of our mineral power. I think that was already spoken about in your initial conversation here, that South Africa's mineral deposits are quite important. You will see that also when it came to the issues around tariffs, America imposed 30% on a lot of products, but it didn't quite impose that on the mineral deposit. That goes to show that there is something quite important about South Africa. And I think what needs to also be said is that AGOA also makes sense. Yes, it's a continental package for America, but South Africa is quite important for Americans as well. We are a big contributor economically there.
Yes.
So I think it would be very difficult for that to be set aside without any sort of serious alternative. So I just don't want us to also look at South Africa that it's the small player economically and so forth, but I think it's an important player in the international balance of forces. As you see, of course, its relationship with BRICS, specifically China as well. But as a final note, I think it's important to understand that South Africa does straddle between the East and the West, whether in terms of the trade routes, being on the southern tip of Africa, whether it's in terms of our entry into Africa, given our infrastructure, our harbors and so forth. So that's what we're going to see Cyril Ramaphosa going to do, to be able to navigate that middle road as a middle income country. So I think there's still a lot South Africa to engage with the Americans, and I think vice versa.
Before I go to my digital audience, one of the things you mentioned was the issue of BRICS. And one of the things that the Trump administration took issue with, as stated in that order back in February, when they were talking about the resettlement of Afrikaners back in February, and he spoke about South Africa reinvigorating its relations with Iran to develop commercial, military and nuclear arrangements. Now, he was also in Qatar, and Qatar is considered an American ally. But it's Qatar's relationship with both Iran and China also are considered strategic allies. Help me square this geopolitical circle, if you will, and in trying to understand the Trump administration's thinking.
Look, man, you have to understand that the world has entered a multipolar era in my reading of things. And necessarily what you will find is that each global or each hegemon is going to look for an ally. And this is what we're seeing with the Americans. This is what we have been seeing with South Africa for quite a long time, not just with BRICS. Prior to that, IPSA. There's a whole genealogy of history here in terms of the third world, global south, and all of that.
Right.
So certainly right now, I think we see that the Americans are trying to look for allies. We just saw the recent trip in Saudi Arabia. Of course, part of the problem in the eyes of the U.S. is that South Africa is choosing allies that are contrary to its own domestic interests and its own, again, global interests. And that's how I think the Americans are viewing it. They've said this, that's how they're viewing South Africans. So, and I think for me, from a sovereign point of view, it can't be that South Africa should be positioned to advance American interests, whether domestically or internationally. And I think President Cyril Ramaphosa is going to have to be clear about that. Yeah. There has been sanctions, of course, in Iran, of course, in Russia. We must not also forget Cuba. And obviously, those are things to be engaged on. Yeah. But I think South Africa is a sovereign country, and I think the United States also understands that. So that's just part of the bargaining that they'll have to do at the diplomatic level.
Right. Khulekani, what would business consider a win post this meeting?
Look, I think it would be, not wise to have very huge expectations that suddenly there's going to be a deal agreed to between the two presidents. I think at the very least, as the president says, would be just to get a reset, a sense that there are no hostilities between the two countries, that we are going to, negotiate a trade deal over time that benefits both countries, such that we do not find ourselves having lost AGOA and not have access to the U.S. market. Mind you, also, we have a lot of U.S. investments in South Africa, so a sense that the relationship has been restored, even if there are no tangible sort of deals agreed to. I think that would be a good start. And then, of course, the diplomatic processes would follow, of ironing out and working out the details of a proper deal.
Yeah. Let's go to a digital audience. Let's hear from Michelle Naidu. Michelle, your question for our guest?
So mine is more of just a comment adding on to everything that has been said. I think that our president really should emphasize that going into this meeting, that the main priority is to salvage and strengthen our relationship with the U.S. and that we continue to remain a committed partner economically and diplomatically, particularly in regional stability and peacekeeping efforts in terms of our diplomatic efforts to support Ukraine. Yeah. However, I think the main thing that Cyril Ramaphosa needs to emphasize is that our policies are reflective of our constitution and the will of our people, and that respect for our sovereignty is the foundation upon which the rebuilding of this relationship needs to take place. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Let's hear from Dimakatso.
I think I'll just lament again on what Michelle just said, is that the president needs to be very cognizant that this isn't a lecture for the president of the United States of America. It's merely a mending of the relationship that has been broken or continues to be in a state of decay. The president is well aware, the president of the United States of America, and I think this meeting is happening at a very crucial time post the 48 individuals or 49 individuals that have migrated to the United States of America, which proves again to the sensitive nature of the claims that the President of the United States of America has been making of white genocide in this country. I think it poses itself as an opportunity for him to reflect on the claims made, and the numbers that have presented themselves as refugees or presented themselves as people who are in a place of crisis cannot be true, because when we check the ratio of the individuals that are perceived to be facing this crisis, it doesn't add up. So I hope President Donald Trump is in this moment reflecting on such issues and will kind of relax the hostility that might have been there if this meeting happened a few weeks ago.
Thanks, Diplomat. So let's hear from Musa. Your question?
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Also, mine is just a comment. And I just want to say and quote from the words of Robert Subuka when he said that there is only one race and it is the human race. Therefore, no state can exist in isolation. As much as South Africa needs the USA also needs South Africa. Looking at how South Africa has a regional hegemony in Africa.
Musa, I'm so sorry. I think your line is bad. We'll try to clear it up in a short while, maybe during the break, and we'll try to get your comments. We need to take a quick break. SABC News has reliably learned that the president has departed for Washington, D.C. What's at stake? What is on the cards? How do you reset this relationship? And what does it mean for not only business, but geopolitics? More next. Welcome back. You're watching It's Topical. I want to take you to a regular word on the street feature. We took to various streets seeking diverse insights and perspectives on this topic. And this is what you had to say with regard to this upcoming meeting between President Cyril Ramaphosa as well as President Donald Trump.
I hope that Uncle Cyril can actually, for this time around, just go out there and take a very solid stance in as far as can we be allowed to have South African solutions for South African problems.
I think President Ramaphosa and President Trump should focus on just trying to have benefits on both countries, extend trade, try to do some deals. Both of them are good deal makers.
I don't think this meeting is going to yield any positive results, mainly because I feel like President Trump is focused on building the economy of the US and will do whatever it takes to just make sure that the economy of the US is top-notch.
I think what Ramaphosa should do as Trump is firstly make peace, and secondly, when the South African government has attacked Israel in the ICJ, I think it's a huge mistake. The government will be punished for attacking Israel.
Questions whether it will yield any positive outcomes. I think it might, because personally I do believe that Trump is just playing politics. He does know that it would disadvantage him as well, considering the fact that we are advocating for globalization and countries coming together. I think I'd just give him advice to probably advise Trump to be more considerate, not only think about himself as the president, but think about himself as a representative of US citizens.
It's very important for our president to really outline the status of the country, and considering the fact that we are an emerging market, it is very important that all relations are intact for the good of our economy.
As a president of a country of over 60 million people, you need to know that you've got so many people backing up, so you shouldn't be bullied by a president from another country. So I'm thinking Ramaphosa should take a stand, like Putin did. He took a stand for his people. Hence, he went to war with Ukraine.
We appreciate your thoughts on this matter. Let me bring in Brooke Spector as a former U.S. diplomat. The Elon Musk factor, Brooks, what are the chances of Mr. Musk being in the room with Donald Trump during talks? And if so, how should President Ramaphosa factor him in, especially when talking about South Africa's BEE policies?
Well, good evening. Yeah, if Elon Musk is in the room, a very crowded couch. because you're going to have the president, the vice president, the secretary of state, and Elon's going to have to find another chair. But seriously, he is on his way out as a serious player in the White House. And this is a time for elected and confirmed appointed officials rather than more informal advisors to be party to this. If I could just point to a couple of things that were said, yeah, the American position has been to criticize South Africa for its relationship with Iran, but you'll notice that the Americans are now trying to figure out a way to reestablish a modus operandi, a relationship with Iran, which is more than simply throwing metaphorical rocks at each other. And that, I think, falls away to some degree. Two other quick points. South Africa runs a trade surplus with the United States. It's one of the few countries in the world where that's true, and it's a significant one. And Cyril Ramaphosa, I'm sure, is well aware of that, and he needs to make sure that that is part of his presentation as well. And I guess, finally, we've concentrated, I think, a little too much on the way governments talk to other governments, forgetting that there are over 600 American companies that have operations in South Africa. There are thousands of people who travel between the two countries in formal or informal exchanges, and there are enormous numbers of tourists as well. The relationship is always, in two countries of this type, much more than simply what a president says to another president.
Right.
And I think that should part of Cyril Ramaphosa's presentation as well. These relationships are much broader than simply the fisticuffs that two governments managed to arrange for themselves over the last 3 or 4 months.
Right. Let's go to digital audience. Ntachua, let's hear from your question, then we'll go to Thapelo.
All right. I would like to ask, how can South Africa use its influence over Africa and also its geographic location and also its 2025 presidency to actually negotiate with US, because they actually have some chips to actually negotiate?
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a big question mark whether the United States will be attending the G20 meeting here in South Africa. Dr. Tselapedi, you want to have a bite at that?
Yeah, that's definitely a very difficult question. South African foreign policy has always been anchored on human rights and ensuring that there's development on the continent. You see that through a couple of institutions, NEPAD, African Free Trade Continental Agreement. So that's quite important, but I think it's also made sure that it doesn't behave like a big brother of the continent. So South Africa does not behave, I guess, like the United States would have done historically in Latin America. So that's quite important to appreciate firstly. But also South Africa has involved Africa on a range of platforms. We saw that in the G20 as well. And we saw that as well at the BRICS meeting a few years ago when they did invite a couple of countries as well.
Yeah.
So that's quite important. Yes, you don't have to come as a country alone when you negotiate with the United States. You can certainly say that there are other markets on the continent. These are the billion people or consumers that you can bring along. But I don't think it's going to be so easy. I think in an age where everybody, not just the United States, is looking for allies, they're not looking to engage singularly the continent, they're going to engage countries individually. And that would make sense for the United States as it would make for China, the same would make for other host of countries as well. So I think there isn't too much to lean on for me to answer directly to Maleke. But certainly there is a lot of instruments that South Africa can say in terms of our infrastructure, our ports, the entry into the continent. Especially you'll find a number of companies in South Africa use South Africa as a base to enter into the continent. Yes. So that's quite important as well to leverage on. It's not a mistake that there's quite a lot of diplomatic presence in Pretoria, precisely because a lot of the foreign countries use Pretoria as a gateway into the continent.
Right.
So that goes the same way for corporate South Africa.
Let's hear from Sicelo, your question.
It's not more of a question, and good evening, Blaine. It's more of a comment, really, and I think one or two things rather that I must emphasize going into this particular meeting with President Trump is that President Ramaphosa must ensure that we maintain high diplomacy in understanding that he is experienced in negotiating. But one thing, if we are to ask the question, how do we reset the relationship between South Africa and the United States, is that we need to address the question of the distortions of what he has been told of what is happening in South Africa when it relates to questions of genocide in South Africa, and perhaps our ICJ case to against Israel. We need to also then maintain the second position, which is maintaining high sovereignty. When he goes into the meeting, we are not simply going to fold simply because of negotiations. That must be a don't touch point in our diplomatic approach to this matter. But also, I do think we all need to come to the understanding that it is difficult to try and reset the relationship between the United States and South Africa if the attitude of the United States is such that they are going to take the position that distortions are going to disturb relations between the two, especially because the United States is said to have one of the best intelligence agencies in the world. How do you have the best intelligence agencies in the world and you still are unable to depict or sort of decipher that which is fact and fiction?
Let me bring you in, Khulekani. And Brooks has mentioned the number of companies, American companies, doing business here in South Africa. Give us in practical terms, help us understand what it means for the ordinary South Africans, for the ordinary business out there, if we continue to have this frosty relationship with the United States.
So you know, the number of American companies in South Africa is about just over 600. And by some estimate, jobs that are dependent on, one, the American companies that are here, but also trade with the United States is also roughly 600,000 or thereabout. That's a lot of jobs for an economy that already has such high levels of unemployment. And so I think that's important to keep in mind, that one of the single most important aspects of our foreign policy should be our own national interest. There can be no greater national interest than to make sure that your people have jobs. And so I think that's an important part, that if the relationship obviously goes sour and does not improve, a whole lot will be at stake, and those jobs would be at stake. It might not be tomorrow, but it would certainly impact our economy in a big, big way, especially because we're an economy, a small economy that's dependent on trade. Not having access to an economy such as the USA would really hurt South Africa.
Brooks, just again trying to understand the mindset of not only Donald Trump, but his administration. We saw that the United States lifted sanctions against Syria, met Donald Trump meeting with the interim president of Syria. It's hard to figure out whether he's turning a new leaf or not. Difficult to read again. So what I'm trying to get at is, how does South Africa work out Donald Trump's end game here?
Well, you know, Americans tend to want to think of a president having a unified theory of foreign policy, the Truman Doctrine, the Kennedy Doctrine, in this case, the Trump Doctrine. And Donald Trump enunciated it, or he didn't say it specifically that my doctrine is, but he enunciated it with two parts to it. One, that we're not going to meddle with the internal affairs of nations that we deal with, and two, that our task, my task, is to reach deals and agreements. This is very transactional. It harks back to the way he carried out his real estate development business 20, 30, 40 years ago. But it does represent a change. And there is no greater demonstration of that than meeting with a man who previously had been on a terror watch list. The country had been sanctioned. and all of the rest of that. Of course, it's a new Syria. The al-Assad family is gone. And so the Trump administration seems to want to make that breakthrough as part of a larger picture of breakthroughs with other Middle Eastern nations. Let me try to clarify one thing for people, though. This business of the quote-unquote refugees fleeing their genocide and all the rest of this, while this has been a story that is enormous in South Africa, and it's monopolized headlines and broadcast time and social media, I checked with some American journalists or journalists resident in America, and their reaction to it was, no, it really hasn't been a big story in America, partly because so many other things are more important, and partly because we're talking about, in real terms, a trifling number of people. 49 or 59 people is barely visible in a situation where the country has routinely, up until last year at least, taken in tens of thousands of refugees on a yearly basis.
Right.
And for Cyril Ramaphosa, though, to make a point of trying to explain away the quote-unquote genocide is going to be a rhetorical trap for him, because that will put Donald Trump's back up, because he believes this, because it is useful in domestic political terms for his support base. It's not that he's so concerned with the South African circumstances of these people, but the way in which the people who support him feel about such things. And so we have to make that distinction very, very clear.
We need to be watching this meeting very closely. Unfortunately, we run out of time. Musa, I do apologize. Your line is just not up to scratch, but we'll try to get you back on another show, another topic. Thank you so much to all our guests, Brooke Spector, Dr. Thapelo Tselapedi, as well as Khulekani. Thank you so much, Mathe. Insightful discussion. We'll see how it plays out, whether the status quo will remain or will we get some change. Appreciate your time, digital audience. As always, value added. All right, before we go, here's my take. You probably heard of this saying, clarity is power. What does it mean? A sound grasp on expectations and values, standing. Where do I stand with you? Clarity, right? This helps in charting a way forward, and at the same time, empowering all parties, all stakeholders. If you're looking at it from a South African point of view, the call by some will be for a mutually respectful relationship with the United States that aligns with this country's national priorities. So, what is needed now is for critical thinking and coherence to trump confusion. And that's my take. If you miss anything on this program, then be sure to watch this episode of It's Topical on YouTube, as well as SABC Plus. If you're watching a repeat of this program, then as always, the news continues. Unwrap Africa, up next with Topical. Until next week, my brothers and sisters, take care. Bye-bye.